everyone, Teacher Tanya here. I'd like to share with you how I begin my writing unit on narrative writing. I always begin with this picture book. Doesn't matter if they're in elementary school, you can use it with middle schoolers. It's called Ralph Tells a Story by Abby Hanlon. And the goal of using this book is to really show kids that stories are everywhere. So yeah, I begin reading this story, and it follows this little boy, Ralph, and nothing ever happens to Ralph. As you can see on his paper, he's got his name and, you know, just lines, nothing happening. Now, if you're worried, if you're a middle school teacher or an upper elementary teacher, and you're thinking, oh my goodness, you know, this is too babyish of a story. You know, I always say kids get engaged if the teacher is engaged. And I love this book. I hope you love this book as much as I do, because it's very realistic. You know, I've taught kids like this for many, many years who, you could just see by the pictures, really struggling with coming up with an idea to write about. So that's what I love this book. It's for generating ideas, right? And really showing kids that stories are everywhere. So I begin with this book, and it's funny. I have red hair. I don't know if you can see it here on camera. There's my hair color. But the teacher in this story, and I always wear my hair up when I read this book to the kids, but this teacher in the story, there she is. My teacher always said, stories are everywhere. She kind of reminds me of the Magic School Bus teacher. And I use a funny voice when I read this book to them as a teacher. And so, you know, she's telling them stories are everywhere, really encouraging the kids to write. And, you know, he just can't write. He can't think of an idea. I could not write a story. And I feel so bad for him. And then it's like, I have no story. And I love, look at this kid. Those kids that write the lists, the long stories. And so he has this little friend, Daisy, who's his like little desk partner. And she's a very prolific writer. And she's always encouraging him. I've had kids like this, but still no stories. So he's really trying to think of an idea. And then his teacher, you know, keeps on encouraging. And then she's, you know, time to come to the rug and share your stories. And they're all sharing. And there's Ralph covering up his story, right? And he begins not looking at his story, but just saying, I was at the park. I said, an inchworm crawled on my knee. So there he is walking to the front of the room. The teacher called on him. Oh no. And so then he's silent, right? He's like, and you can tell he's probably not written those words down, or maybe part of the words. And then there's his little heartbeat, thump, thump, thump. And then the kids, his friend Daisy leads them, but starts questioning him, right? Wow, really? Did it feel squishy, wet Ralphie? Did you take it home? You know, and then did it tickle? All these questions, right? And so then he starts remembering. And this is what is so magical about this book, because kids need to write what they know. So he was remembering, you know, the story as it unfolds. Well, I picked up the inchworm and I decided to name him Nick. I built Nick a house, and then he just inched away, and so I followed him. What I do, you know, and you can do too, is photocopy these pages, colored if you can, and then cut these bubbles out and have them as a display for Ralph's story. Because in future videos, I'll show you how when we learn the skills that I teach in the narrative unit, we start adding those skills to Ralph's writing. We revise his writing by adding those skills. It's so much fun. So you can cut out these little bubbles and just have them in order on a board, a reference board for your kids. And oh, this is a funny part. So in Ralph's story, the inchworm, excuse me, crawls into a baby's diaper. And the kids love this part. Diaper! But Ralph does such a good job. He's using dialogue, he's using action, he's using good description. So it's a great story. And then all the kids cheered, and you can see what he actually wrote. I was at the park. I wasn't embarrassed anymore, so I did. So And then he has 100 funny stories by Ralph. The stapler, the kids that have those thick piles of paper and they're trying to get those the staples to get in there. And so he tells, I love this, writing tips from Ralph, from a future non-writer, from a previous non-writer, from a future writer. And then all the books that he's written. So these are all like everyday stories. Stories are everywhere. So if you can instill that belief in your kids and kind of make them like story detectives like Ralph here, they'll have a much easier time writing about what they know. So there's Daisy's embarrassing birthday party. What is this? A lunch lady's friend. The worst staple jam ever. We talked about him stapling all those pages. So really, the inchworm returns, the smelly Band-Aid, ew! So I start the unit with reading this story and then just letting kids know that stories are everywhere. And if you do get a bulletin board of Ralph's inchworm story, you make a copy, photocopy, and cut him out and kind of put his story in order. You can have next to it like stories are everywhere, right? A banner that says stories are everywhere, and just give kids post-it notes and just start listing story ideas that they come up with and posting them up there. Like maybe there's a fun classroom story, like one time a bird flew in my classroom, open window. Something that happened at lunch. A lot of times when, it's spring and kids are finding the caterpillars. So just listing everyday ideas, because sometimes kids have this idea in their mind that it's too difficult to come up with ideas. My idea is not good enough. So this is where I start. I hope you love this story as much as I do. I think Abby Hanlon did a very good job of just showing the frustration of kids who really struggle with coming up with an idea. So that's the very first thing I do, is just kind of let kids know that stories are everywhere. Writing is not always easy, but we can help each other become a community of writers that are supportive, and know that our ideas are valuable and they're everywhere.